back in the late 1930s. That, of course, was before all the interstates and all of that. And the most important thing to know about that neighborhood when it came to young 12-year-old Opal and her family was that they were a black family that was moving in from way out east by the Louisiana line. And that neighborhood they were moving into was a mostly white neighborhood at East Annie Street in Fort Worth. And they moved there in June of 1939. They had been told, apparently, by a local real estate agent it would be fine, even though they were a black family moving into a mostly white neighborhood. It was not fine. They did not last the week. And it made the local news in headlines that are still sort of hard to look at today. Fort Worth crowd attacks Negroes. Violence climaxed observance of Negro emancipation last night when a crowd estimated at 500 persons stormed the residence of Otis Flake, Negro, at 940 East Annie Street. The men hurled rocks at the house and then entered the dwelling and began carrying furniture into the street after Mr. Flake, his wife, and 3 children fled from the house. Flake moved into the house last Friday. For 4 nights, since they've been there, police have watched the area, attempting to disperse crowds that assembled on a nearby corner to protest the moving of Negroes into a white residential district. Here's another one. Negro driven out, furniture burned, mob evicts black from white neighborhood. Police today were investigating a near riot which developed last night when a group of approximately 500 persons drove Otis Flake, Negro, from his recently purchased home. Here's another one. Negro tenants are protested. This one described, quote, aroused residents who have been fighting against the encroachment of Negroes in the area. That one was actually published in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram before the attack that drove the family from their home. This article, Negro tenants are protested, described a crowd of about 150 people that had to be dispersed from outside their home on that Saturday night. It's quite possible that that article from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram about the aroused residents fighting encroachment of Negroes was part of how the crowd the next night, Sunday night, ended up at 500 instead of 150. And that 500-strong crowd is the one that actually burned them out. About 10 years ago, Bud Kennedy at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram dug up some of these old headlines of that attack on the Flake family for a column he wrote about it. From the local headlines and the stories he was able to piece together from the time, he was able to sort of fit together the way it evolved. Police might have said they were investigating the, quote, mobbing. Police told the local press at the time that, in fact, the mob destroyed the family's furniture, broke windows in the house, damaged the building, hit a man at the scene with a baseball bat. The next day, quote, youths came into the house and turned on the gas jets and then fled so the building would burn, too. Even though that's what happened, and the police were supposedly on it, and they had been on it for 4 straight nights by the time the family was finally burned out, nobody was ever arrested, apparently. According to Bud Kennedy, quote, nothing further was ever published about the incident or any investigation. And like I said, she was 12 years old when it happened, one of the 3 children of Otis and Maddie Flake, who were burned out of that home in June 1939. She was interviewed about it later by a reporter named Angelique Jackson, and she told Jackson this. She said, quote, people gathered. The police couldn't control them. My dad came home with a gun, and the police told him if he busted a cap, they'd let that mob have him. She says, quote, if they had given us an opportunity to stay there and be their neighbors, they would have found out we didn't want any more than what they had. A decent place to stay, jobs that paid, to be able to go to school in the neighborhood, even if it was a segregated school. We would have made good neighbors, she said, but they didn't give us an opportunity. And I felt like everybody needs an opportunity. Again, that attack that burned the Flake family out of their home on what was literally the 4th night they were trying to sleep in that home, that happened in 1939, the summer of 1939 in Fort Worth, Texas. But I want to put back up on the screen there for a second one piece from that coverage from the time, that quote about when exactly it happened. Remember this lead here from that first story from the AP that I mentioned? Violence climaxed observance of Negro emancipation late tonight, when a crowd estimated at 500 persons stormed the residence of Otis Flake. Violence climaxed observance of Negro emancipation. What that awkward language from the newspaper in 1939 tells you is that this attack happened specifically on June 19th, 1939. It happened during the observance of the emancipation of African Americans in the United States. It was June 19th, 1865, when General Gordon Granger and his Union troops rode into Galveston, Texas. This is after the end of the Civil War. And he issued General Order Number 3 for the first time, bringing news to the 250,000 enslaved black people in Texas at the time that by law they were now free. There's actually a huge mural there now in Galveston on the site where General Granger issued that proclamation. It says absolute equality. See that? And June 19th has been celebrated in Texas, in the state of Texas, for a very long time. It's been a paid state holiday in Texas since 1979. As in that local news article from 1939, the date was sometimes sort of delicately described as the observance of Negro emancipation. But what we call it now is Juneteenth. Vice President Kamala Harris said today at the White House, throughout history, Juneteenth has been known by many names: Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, Emancipation Day. Today, she said, it's a national holiday. Despite the attack on her family home in 1939 when she was just 12 years old, both young enough and old enough to be deeply scarred and scared for life by something like that, young Miss Opal, again, 12 years old when it happened, she survived that attack along with her two siblings and her mother and father. She would go on to play an important role in local celebration of that holiday in Texas, specifically in Fort Worth, where she has lived the rest of her life. She was a teacher. She went on to work for local charities. She ultimately became part of the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society, which led the local Juneteenth celebrations every year. But in 2016, when it was President Obama's final year in office as president, as America's first black president, Miss Opal, her name is now Opal Lee, she basically decided that she was going to go for broke, that she had been doing this work her whole life. She had a special reason for this to mean something very important to her, to turn it into something positive in her life. But she decided she would go big. She had written a letter to President Obama, essentially sort of warning him in the nicest possible way that she was going to come to Washington at some point, and the point of her trip would be that this Texas holiday, Juneteenth, should be celebrated all over the country. It should be a national holiday marking the end of slavery, not just a Texas holiday. She thought we should actually celebrate as a country from June the 19th all the way to July the 4th for Independence Day. Same way we celebrate Mardi Gras for a big chunk of February. She was saying, let's celebrate liberation and independence as a whole country together for the whole end of June through the first week in July. Juneteenth in June to July 4th in July. Let's make that our national reflection and celebration of independence, liberation, freedom. So she had sent President Obama her letter. But then in 2016, when it was his last year in office, she decided she would go see him. She would walk to Washington, D.C. from Fort Worth, Texas. She was 89 years old when she did that. Again, that was 2016. She has been leading a national effort to try to have the holiday recognized all these years. She said that she wanted to bring 100,000 signatures on a petition to Congress when she went to when she went to Capitol Hill in 2020. By the time she actually got to Capitol Hill with her petition in September of last year, September 2020, she didn't have 100,000 signatures on her petition. She had 1.5 million signatures on her petition. Now, she did not succeed in her goal on that trip to Washington, September of last year. But, try again. In February of this year, the legislation to actually create the holiday was introduced yet again. And this time, like she said, everybody needs an opportunity. And when the House passed it yesterday, Miss Opal Lee, 94 years old now, said she was overwhelmed with emotion.
I've got so many different feelings, all gurgling up here. I don't know what to call them all. I'm so delighted to know that finally we've got a Juneteenth bill passed.
Miss Opal Lee was on hand for the signing ceremony. She was given pride of place with a front row seat alongside roughly 80 members of Congress and local officials and activists and community leaders who advocated for this. Her outsized role in the events that led to passage of the bill also warranted a place for her in the president's remarks today.
We're blessed to mark the day in the presence of Miss Opal Lee. As my mother said, God love her. I had the honor of meeting her in Nevada more than a year ago. She told me she loved me, and I believed it. I wanted to believe it. Miss Opal, you're incredible. A daughter of Texas, grandmother of the movement to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. You are an incredible woman, Ms. Opal. You really are. She's made it her mission to see that this day came. It was almost a singular mission. She's walked for miles and miles, literally and figuratively, to bring attention to Juneteenth, to make this day possible.